Hello, I'm going to discuss a book project, my next book project, and the title is Plural Subjects, the Social Ontology of Us. The idea of the book project is to present a plural subject view that I have been developing over the last 2 decades in a bit of a more coherent and comprehensive way than is possible in journal papers and book chapters. The schedule for the project is that I want to complete the first draft in October, so that now would be a very good time for you to provide input. The starting point of the book is that we are social animals. Social animals are animals who live together, and as the particular kind of social animals we live together in ways that involve a whole world of social norms, institutions, social structures and artifacts. The social ontology is the inquiry into how the social world exists. And it is the study of how the various features of the social world are made, how they are constituted or constructed. As such, social ontology is not only interesting in itself, it is also relevant for an understanding of who we are as the particular kind of social animals that is ours. So this is the general topic of the book. The book will focus on our own role in the social world. How are we involved in the social world and how is it ours? Firstly, and most obviously, we are part of the social world as its denizens or inhabitants. And we are the denizens of the social world in a great number of ways. We are those who occupy the various social roles. As the denizens of the social world, we are those who fill our positions or find ourselves excluded and pushed to the margins. We are those who are authorized and empowered or find ourselves oppressed or discriminated against. And we are those who often find their own creative ways of dealing with the restrictions and opportunities provided by a cluttered social world. And in all of these ways and many others and combinations thereof, we roam the social world as its inhabitants. But we are not only part of the social world as its denizens. There is a fundamentally different role to be considered. We do not just roam the social world more or less freely, we also make it. In a sense that certainly needs more clarification. We are the creators of the social world, the demiurges thereof. Our social orders are neither fully determined by nature, nor are they imposed on us by the gods. Nor does the social world of norms, institutions, structures, and artifacts simply constitute or construct itself. As it is often said in the recent literature, we make or construct the social world. We thus have a second and remarkably different story to tell about our role in the social world. There isn't just the ordinary tale of us, the denizens of the social world. There is also the tale of us, the demiurges and creators thereof. We are not just the players in the social game, as it were, we're also the authors. We are not just the ones playing by the rules or violating them, being structurally privileged or marginalized. We are also in the business of making the rules for ourselves and structure our living together in the way we do. This tale of us being the demiurges rather than just the denizens of the social world has particular emotional appeal because it inspires with a sense of freedom. It suggests that the social world is really up to us. And if it is up to us, perhaps we don't necessarily need to do it in the way we do. If it is us who set the rules and create the structures, we might be able to set different rules for ourselves and change our structures. This is an appealing thought, since there is good reason to be disaffected by the ways in which we live together. The tale of the demiurge the demiurges, inspires with a sense of contingency and alternative possibilities. However, the tale of the demiurges also sounds dubious. There is an almost conspiratorial ring to this tale. Who exactly is this mysterious, authoritative we that is behind it all as the maker of the social world? And who and how does this we relate to the more pedestrian and commonsensical perspective in which we are the creatures rather than the creators of social norms, institutions, and structures, the denizens rather than the demiurge of the social world? Is the demiurgical tale just a self-glorifying ideology for ordinary people in power? The main aim of this book is to argue for the view that there is indeed a sense in which we are the demiurges rather than just the denizens of the social world. I will argue that it is as plural subjects that we are in the business of creating the social world. Plural subjecthood is the basic sense in which social ontology should account for our role in society. As plural subjects, we make the social world. And by making the social world with its structure of roles, we constitute or construct ourselves as the denizens thereof. The way to connect the story of the denizen to the story of the demiurge is thus a story of self-making, self-constitution, and self-creation. It is the demiurge that creates the denizen, only that what is being made here by ourselves is ourselves. The theory of the plural subject relies on two orthogonal distinctions between singular and plural existence and between social objects and social subjects. The distinction between singular and plural existence is between what we are, each of us for themselves, apart from each other, and what we are together with each other. It is between what we are distributively, individually, or severally on the one hand, and what we are collectively, jointly, or together on the other hand. We exist in both ways. There is a sense in which each of us lives a life of their own, as the individuals we are. But there are also many ways in which we live together as friends, couples, families, teams, groups, or organizations, sometimes in transitory formations, sometimes in forms that extend our individual lifetimes by far. Elucidating the relation between singular and plural existence is a core task of social ontology, and it has often been recognized as such. The distinction between social objects and subjects is basically between what we are made to be by features of the world other than ourselves and what we are in virtue of ourselves. We are made to be what we are in many ways, from the phylogeny of our species to the particular circumstances of our individual lives. Some forms of being made to be are social in nature. These include authorization or appointment, but also oppression, discrimination, and even brute violence. But not all we are is what we are made to be. Some is due to ourselves. Or to put it more cautiously, we are what or who we are partly in ways that are attributable to ourselves. In particular, we are what we are through ourselves by making up our own minds, having our own convictions, evaluations, and intentions, and by acting accordingly. To put it in a single word, by choice. This is how I will use the good old or bad old subject-object distinction. As social objects, we are determined through somebody or something else. As subjects, we are, in a basic sense, self-determined. As social objects, we are made to be what we are. with social norms and structures explaining who we are and what we are committed to do. As subjects, we are, in a sense, to be qualified further, of our own making. Whatever we accept as valid and worthwhile doing, as subjects, we accept as such of our own accord. We are, as subjects, self-committed. As social objects, we can be explained as what we are by what shapes us, puts us in our positions, and makes us the people, position holders, role players, persons, teams, groups, and organizations we are. As subjects, by contrast, we cannot be explained in other ways than through ourselves, in terms of our own perspective. As subjects, we cannot be explained. Rather, we have to be accounted for on our own terms, in virtue of our own first-person authority. To put this in another venerable dichotomy, subjects cannot be explained. They have to be understood. That is, they have to be taken on their own terms. So much for the two distinctions, the distinction between singular and plural existence and the distinction between subjects and objects. These distinctions are the main conceptual tools I'm going to use throughout the book manuscript. Now, in much of the received literature, there's a tendency to combine these two distinctions in such a way as to say that it is in our singular existence only that we are subjects, while the plural ways in which we exist are to be conceived of primarily in terms of social objects with essential features only in a derivative sense. The core argument of this book is that this view is mistaken, that the two distinctions cut across each other, and that it is as plural subjects, in virtue of our first-person plural authority, that we are the makers or demiurges, rather than just the denizens of the social world. Living together in the ways we do is, in a sense, to be clarified further, indeed a choice. And it is a choice we make as the plural subjects we are. It is as plural subjects that we determine the normative framework and, as a consequence, the structure that makes us the singular and plural objects whom we find ourselves to be as the denizens of the social world. In our social roles and positions, where we are determined by social norms and structures that are of our own making. I will now give an overview over the main contents of the book manuscript. The plural subject view is developed in this book in 3 steps. The first part of the book introduces the idea of first-person plural authority through the plural subject view of shared collective or joint intentionality. This part engages heavily with the literature on the first-person perspective and the role of self-awareness in the philosophy of mind, as well as with the literature on joint action. Many authors in the current debate argue convincingly that for our way of living together, our capacity for joint action is basic, and that our way of acting together should be accounted for in terms of joint, shared, or collective intentionality. It means joint attention, collective intentions, shared belief, and collective emotion. However, there is disagreement over the question of what exactly is collective, shared, or joint about collective, shared, or joint intentionality. I use the established and widely accepted analysis of intentionality in terms of content, mode, and subject. And I argue in this part that collective intentionality is not just collective in its content, and that the mode accounts that abound in the present literature mistake for an intentional mode what is really the intentional subject. The plural subject account of collective intentionality argues that our collective intentional attitudes are ours in the same way as my singular intentional attitude is mine. We are the plural intentional subject of the former in the way I am the singular intentional subject of the latter. I argue further that the way in which an intentional attitude is mine is in the special way I am, under suitable circumstances, conscious of it. The feature of consciousness that is at stake here is pre-reflective self-awareness or self-consciousness or self-knowledge. Pre-reflective self-awareness comes in the plural as well as in the singular form. Following the literature on the singular intentional subject, pre-reflective self-awareness can be characterized by at least 4 functions it has in the mind. Pre-reflective self-awareness is the feature in virtue of which we are self-identified as the subject of the attitude. It is the feature in virtue of which we, though fallibly, know what's on our mind, our own mind, just like that, non-observationally and non-inferentially. It is the feature in virtue of which our own attitudes are our commitments, and lastly, it is the feature in virtue of which, under normal circumstances, we are in the best position to know what's on our own minds and thus speak our mind with authority. I argue in this part that we find those 4 features or functions realized in shared, joint, or collective attitudes. We are thus, the argument goes, indeed plural intentional subjects of shared attitudes in the same way in which we are single subjects of individual attitudes, that is, in virtue of our being plurally conscious of an attitude as ours. Not surprisingly, however, plural subjecthood differs in important ways from singular subjecthood. After all, it is plural rather than singular. The 2 most important insights into plural subjecthood to take away from this first part of my book are the following. First, the plural is not a collective singular. We are not unified in the way I am unified. And the we is not a big collective I. The way the plural subject is one is in the form of a unity of many. Second, and equally importantly, while analyzing plural subjecthood, we should not forget a lesson to be learned from the literature on singular subjectivity. The subject is not an object that has subjectivity as its feature. The subject is not an object at all. Rather, the subject is an adverbial feature of intentional attitudes. There is no such object as the we. Rather, we are the way in which our shared attitudes are ours, in the same way as there is no such thing as the I. The second part of the book implies the insights into plural subjecthood for a discussion of the concept of society as joint, shared, or collective activity. Society is, in the view under discussion, something we do, and we do it together. This opens up a perspective on the ontology of the basic infrastructure of the social world. The way in which we live together is the way in which we organize ourselves. We organize ourselves through our conventions, norms, and institutions. Conventions, norms, and institutions are standardizations of individual contributions to our joint activities. As the ways in which we organize ourselves, they are thus up to us together in the same way as our more or less idiosyncratic ways of structuring complex singular activities in the same way as they are up to us individually. So take, for example, an action that you perform outside of socially determined roles. You have your way of doing it. Now, norms, institutions, etc. are our collective, joint, plural way of living together. As a joint activity, our living together is collectively intentional and is thus plurally subjective. As argued in the first section, the plural subject is the way in which the participants are plurally pre-reflectively self-aware of the joint activity as theirs. However, pre-reflective self-awareness is not always reflectively transparent. The second claim developed in the second part of the book is that though as plural subjects we are self-identified through our pre-reflective self-awareness, we often and indeed systematically ignore who we are on a reflective level and mistake ourselves either for an aggregate of singular subjects or an aggregate of singular or plural objects. This corresponds to the views developed in the economic model, in sociologistic models, or in recent functionalist and proceduralist accounts of group agency, respectively. I argue that being mistaken at the reflective level about what we pre-reflectively are is the condition of inauthenticity and objectification, as it has been addressed in recent critical social ontology. Inauthenticity is a subject's mistaking themselves for a social object. For example, by identifying themselves with social roles, positions, and identities in which they are not determined by themselves. The third part of the book argues that the task of becoming reflectively clear about who we pre-reflectively are is ultimately a practical rather than a purely theoretical matter. It is not only through established organizations that we are plural subjects. Rather, we are plural subjects through the however implicit awareness that our living together is up to us plurally. More often than not, plural subjects are rather disorganized, though it makes good sense to live together in ways that leave each of us as much individual freedom as possible. We are plurally often in something like the plural equivalent of the condition of singular agents who, for lack of reasoning and determination, cannot get their own individual act together. Under such conditions, the way in which we perform the joint intentional activity of living together is by letting our living together be something that we do to each other and letting it be done to us. The first step to getting together our plural act of living together properly, the first step to live better together, is to become reflectively clear about who we pre-reflectively are, those whose coexistence is up to themselves in radical plural self-determination. Adequately reconstructed, plural self-determination is plural self-choice and radical collective responsibility. And for us to achieve authenticity as the singular participant subjects we are, we have to engage as partners in the joint activity of determining who we together are to be. We have to settle which values we set for ourselves. That is how we together want to organize ourselves and live together. In a world where what we do affects all of us, plural self-determination is radical only if it's all-inclusive. Under such conditions, a reflective practice of determining our particular way of living together against theirs is a way of determining others and letting us to be determined by them. For any exclusive practice of reflective self-determination as a particular group, thus has to be carried out as a contribution to and participation in inclusive self-determination. Plural self-determination thus implies the idea of the widest we. In this way, the argument developed in this book ultimately leads back to the historical origin of the current debate on collective intentionality. The idea of we intention was originally conceived of as a conception of the moral point of view in terms of what we, the least parochial we, want. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your reactions.